A couple has lost their son in an accident. They move to another country for a chance at a peaceful life. To their dismay, they find they cannot escape the remnants of what took place. A car rides near cornfields. Suddenly, the scene changes to a lady screaming in a hospital bed. The personnel there come to her aid. Another quick change of scene shows us an epitaph for Nathan Boyle. The family stands at his funeral. Later, the mother Rachel stands morose near her window. She and her husband Anthony sign papers to move elsewhere. They eventually arrive in Finland. They arrive at their house with their son, Elliot. Anthony expresses his optimism about being there, and his wife tries to follow his mindset. But she starts getting worried because Elliot has left their side. So, Rachel looks for him and finds him far away from the house. She scolds him for being so far away. Scared of what could have happened to her son, she cries. Then, Rachel walks through the house and looks at a picture of a child, which causes her to cry again. She enters the upstairs area to look for her son. When she doesn't see him, she opens a door instead. She looks into the dark space that it reveals. Elliot makes a sound to startle her, and she goes over to him. From a window there, she observes Anthony talking to some people. When she comes down to join them, they have already left. Her husband tells her they got invited to a welcome party. At night, Rachel is putting Elliot to sleep. He asks her if they love him as much as they loved Nathan, and she assures him that they do. His question prompts her to comfort him some more. While she does, she finds a device in his bed. She asks him where he got it from, and he shows her a box with Nathan's name on it. He wants to keep it, and his mother lets him. She goes to sleep shortly after. At a cornfield, people are partaking in a funeral. They lower a coffin into the ground, and the person inside moves and screams. Rachel is there too, covered in black clothing. She wakes from the nightmare, terrified. As Anthony comforts her, she describes the nightmare to him. She tells him about how she opens the coffin and sees him. Her husband thinks she's talking about Nathan, but she says it's Elliot, and he is deathly pale. On the next day, they make a burial for Nathan, somewhat far from the house. Elliot offers the device he wanted to keep last night, so they bury it along with other possessions. Then, they go boat riding. Anthony shows them rocks with handprints on them. He says that his father told him cavemen may have put them there, and legend has it that if someone puts their hand on a print and makes a wish, it will come true. Inspired, Elliot places his hand on it. The family quickly settles into a routine. Anthony sits typing in a room while Rachel does laundry. She hears her son talking to someone in his room and comes to him. To her surprise, he is alone in his room. When she asks who he is talking to, Elliot stands to close the door. At the welcoming party for Anthony and Rachel, a lady comes up to Rachel and introduces herself as Helen. She speaks well of her husband. They see some people looking at them, which makes Helen say they don't like that she's talking to Rachel. So, Helen invites her to walk outside, and they do. She gives her condolences about Nathan being taken away from her. Rachel says she didn't want to stay in their old house because everything there reminded her of Nathan. She also mentions she's a photographer, but does not photograph people. Helen wants to make it clear that she's not crazy, but the others think she is. Afterward, they both sit in a gazebo, and Helen takes her hand. She states she dreamed about Rachel and her son. He made a wish, and it was granted. At that moment, Anthony calls out to her, and Helen gets up to leave. She gives Rachel her card and goes. Following that, they stand in an area where over a dozen people give them a Finnish wedding ceremony. The couple mounts a huge wooden wedding swing, and the people there row them from side to side. In just a short while, Rachel panics, but her husband enjoys the experience. Then, Rachel notices that Elliot is not among the crowd, and panics even more. She loses consciousness, prompting everyone to stop the movement. She lies on the ground screaming, while Anthony tends to her and the people encircle them. Later, we observe them riding in a boat with Elliot. He says they found him in bed at home. Rachel thinks it's weird that Elliot won't tell them where he was. She tells her husband that Elliot's behavior has been increasingly suspicious. This prompts Anthony to turn on the lights. Rachel wonders if he noticed Elliot's change in behavior. She also mentions that Helen said something strange about him. Her husband tells her not to pay attention to Helen. He thinks that Rachel just wants him to spend more time with Elliot, so he promises to do that. Meanwhile, Elliot gets out of his bed and goes into the one that's supposed to be Nathan. The next day, Anthony sits and looks at a picture of Nathan while crying. At the table, Rachel sees that Elliot drew a picture of the accident. She confronts him about it and tells him not to draw it again. She throws all his drawings away angrily. In bed, Rachel dreams of lying on the ground and being encircled by others. She also dreams of Elliot touching the rock with the handprint and herself running through the cornfields. She awakens at night and goes to the kitchen to drink some milk. She starts choking and is forced to spit it out. In the sink, she finds that she spit out a strange, prickly object. Following that, Rachel sees Elliot standing outside. She rushes to him, but he soon vanishes, only to quickly reappear and state something soundlessly. At that point, Rachel believes it has to be a dream. We see her sitting up on her bed, proving she was right. She then comes to Elliot and sees that he's sleeping in Nathan's bed. She corrects this by placing him back in his. To her surprise, the boy tells her that he's Nathan and not Elliot. On the next day, Rachel tells Anthony about the situation. She thinks something is wrong with their son. This prompts them to take action. They start removing all of Nathan's things, including the bed. Elliot throws a fit about this. Exasperated, his mother tells him he's not Nathan, and knocks him down. Of course, she quickly comes to comfort him. While doing so, she looks at the picture of Nathan smiling. At a doctor's office, the doctor tells the couple their family has experienced a tragedy. This is why Elliot behaves the way he does. He also says he understands what is going on. Elliot is trying to deal with the situation in his way. He is like a mirror that reflects Rachel's emotions, and that means she has to stay calm. But Rachel is not satisfied with the doctor's advice and leaves. She goes to see Helen. In her house, Rachel asks about Helen's earlier statement about Elliot. Rather than answering her question directly, Helen stands and asks if Rachel is religious. She talks about how this is a pagan area, and Rachel asks what that has to do with Elliot. It has everything to do with him, is the answer she gets. Next, Helen shows her how many places and architectures here are circular. She also shows her the sacrificial rock. When Rachel expresses confusion, Helen talks about the meaning of circle. After that, she restates that Elliot made a wish, and it was granted. But it is not his brother that comes to him at night. She shows Rachel a picture of a devilish creature, and calls it the eternal incubus. That is what wants her son. Overwhelmed by the seemingly bogus information, Rachel goes to leave. However, Helen tells her this is what the being wants, disbelief. If they ignore him, he wins. But Rachel leaves anyway. At night, we see Helen walking in her house instead of sleeping. She asks if anybody is there. She hears a door squeaking. Helen walks through the open door and checks behind the bath curtain, but nothing is there. She breathes heavily before letting out a scream. Later, she and Rachel meet again. Helen tells her that her nightmare was a warning. Her husband was the first one to understand what was going on here. He tried to warn them, but she was not ready to believe him. Through a flashback, we see him lying on a bed and behaving demonically. Helen gives Rachel a picture where she and her husband stand with a priest, but her husband's face is blurry. He lost his life the next spring. Rachel asks what the incubus wants from her son. He wants everything, is what Helen says. After saying it, she attempts to assure Rachel that he won't take Elliot away. At her house, Rachel looks through a box and finds a camera. She comes to her son, who she starts swinging, and uses that camera to take pictures of him. But he doesn't like it and walks away. While in bed, Elliot tells his mother that his dad doesn't love him and starts insulting him. Rachel tells him he shouldn't say that, but Elliot persists. He complains about his father loving Nathan more. Soon enough, Rachel finds the toy, which was supposed to be buried, in his bed. She takes it from him and burns it in the fireplace. Anthony comes to her and asks if they can talk. The couple sits and discusses the situation. Rachel sometimes thinks they are being punished. Since Elliot was an easy child, they had to have Nathan too. This implies he was difficult. She reveals there were moments she wished he would vanish. When it actually happened, there was a part of her that was relieved. Anthony hugs her as she weeps. In the late hours of the night, something begins moving through the house. It comes to Rachel and reaches out to her. Elliot calls for her. She wakes up and sees no one there, though shortly after, she witnesses her son standing nearby. He tells her that Nathan wants to see her, so she follows him down, and as she does, we see Helen in her bed telling her not to go. Rachel comes to him. After lighting a candle, he tells her to look into the flame. There is also a mirror there. The boy calls out Nathan's name and informs him that their mother is here. He lets her know that Nathan sees her. He wants her to look in the mirror, so she takes it and he blows out the candle. After looking, she notices Elliot is holding the toy that was burned. A black hand suddenly grabs her. She drops and shatters the mirror. Rachel discovers Anthony's presence there. He stands there, looking at her, and several townspeople start entering. Anthony tells her they only want Elliot. Once they give him, they will get Nathan back. It is an exchange. Rachel looks around and sees her son has vanished. She panics and the people take her. They lay her down and grab a syringe. In the morning, she awakens from her nightmare. She is alone in bed and finds blood on her. Still shaken by the terrifying dream, she goes downstairs to greet her family. Looking in the trash, she sees broken mirror pieces lying there. While they're in town, Rachel tells her husband she will go somewhere. Clearly planning something, she goes to a camera store. In their house, she enters the restroom and looks at the pictures she picked up. They are the ones she took of Elliot on the swing, but he is missing in the pictures, which causes her to panic. She also looks at the film and finds nothing there either. Rachel stands there, trying to process the situation, but she cannot. When she opens the door, Elliot is there and wants to look at the photos. She is forced to tell him that there is something wrong with them. Next, she brings the pictures to Helen and states Elliot was supposed to be in them. Helen informs her that through these photos, the incubus is saying he has her son. Helen wants to see Elliot, and they start leaving for Rachel's home. As they ride away, we see Anthony standing there and witnessing this. Rachel tells Helen about her nightmare. As she tells her about the exchange, Helen starts seeing the bigger picture. Soon, she states that it's the resurrection of the devil. That is why Nathan had to lose his life. The devil will use it to tempt Rachel to become his mother. Afterward, they enter the house and come to Elliot. Helen looks at him and tells Rachel that she is sick. She starts leaving after those words. She enters another room and finds several townspeople there, looking at her. Rachel and Anthony enter as well. Anthony states these people are here to help. This prompts Helen to draw a gun, but the people rush to stop her from using it. They gather around Rachel as well, and Anthony tells them not to hurt her. But they don't listen to him. They inject Rachel with an unknown substance. Meanwhile, Elliot and Nathan are sitting close to each other. When Rachel wakes up, she sees that they have brought her out into an unknown area. She is dressed in white clothes, and the people around her are dressed in similar attire. People dressed in black form a semicircle around them. Anthony is there. Rachel spots Elliot in a coffin and watches someone give Anthony a knife. He comes to Elliot and uses it on him, which causes his wife to scream. A lady collects the blood and brings it to Rachel. She makes her drink it, and her stomach expands from doing so. After that, the white-cloaked women place Rachel in the water. Later, she wakes up in her house where she hears Elliot. She asks him where he is, but he doesn't know. Rachel tries to leave, but the door is locked from the other side by a chair. However, she manages to get it open and hears her husband downstairs. Entering another room, Rachel locates her son in a coffin. He looks like how he did in her nightmare. After getting him out, she says they need to leave, and Elliot says Nathan can help them. She promptly tells him that it's not Nathan. As they run outside, Anthony sees them and goes after his wife and son. As the three run through the woods, Elliot disappears. Rachel soon sees the townspeople standing there. That is when Anthony collides with her and brings her down. She retaliates by slamming him with a rock and follows that with a few punches. Then, she holds the rock over her head and wants to end him. He even tells her to do it, but she cannot. Elliot appears at that moment, and she comes to him. That is when Anthony reveals the earth-shattering truth. There is no twin. Elliot is not real. They lost their only son on the day of the accident. In a flashback, Rachel is driving angrily. The accident quickly follows. Elliot yells at Anthony and tells his mother not to listen. Her husband continues by saying she entered a state of denial, and he lost them both because of that. Miserable from her grief, she invented Elliot, and he became their reason to live. However, it made living hard. Keeping it a secret from everyone was a difficult task. Rachel is taken away to a mental hospital. Anthony kept her in her delusions because he thought it was the only way to help her. But what helped her has eventually destroyed them. It was Rachel who dug up Nathan's toy and broke the mirror over herself. Anthony tells her to just accept it, while the boy keeps yelling. Replaying the accident, Rachel imagines herself in black clothing. After that, Elliot runs away again, and she runs after him. She finds him in a huge farm building. He cries and says she doesn't believe him anymore. Hugging him, she reassures him that she does. She says he is her son, and she loves him. Anthony comes to them and yells out that Elliot is not real. As Elliot stands on the lower level, Anthony pulls a lever that pours grain in Elliot's direction. We see him get covered by it, and Rachel pushes her husband down for what he did. She descends and frantically digs in the grain in search of her son, but she finds nothing. There is no one there, so she comes to Anthony instead and discovers that his life is over. At a later time, Rachel attends to Nathan and Anthony's graves. When she leaves and sits in her car, an imaginary Anthony sits beside her. Nathan and Elliot are in the car as well. Rachel is clearly still suffering.